The original 56 1.2 has near legendary status among Fujifilm shooters and also happens to be one of my favorite lenses. In recent years, Fujifilm has set about updating their old lenses with the new ones, and the same goes for the 56 1.2, which I picked up while I was in Japan. So in this video, I'm going to review this new 56 1.2 and also compare it against the old version, and I think the results might actually surprise some of you. It's worth noting that the new 56 1.2 comes in at around $1,000, whereas the old version you can actually pick up second hand for about $350. But yeah, the new version is significantly more expensive than the old version. Now, while the 56 1.2 was intended as a portrait lens, I actually use it more for street photography. My style of street photography isn't always strictly taking photos of people. I like to incorporate lots of textures and abstract photos, and I find with the 56 1.2 I'm able to get more creative with my photography. Now the autofocus and stuff is slow, and I am going to get on to that later on in this review, but purely from a photo taking perspective, I find that the 56mm lens makes me more creative, and I just really enjoy using it. As for the 56mm focal length, you are very tight in on your subject, so it's a very different experience to shoot in, say, with a 23mm. With a 56mm, when you're building compositions, you're really stacking your subject against the background and then getting something in the foreground. Whereas if you're shooting, say, with the 23, you can build out your composition more horizontally or vertically. But yeah, I find a lens like this makes me more creative, and I've had a lot of fun using the 56 1.2, and the same goes for the new version. One last thing before getting started: if you want to support this channel, you can just hit that thumbs up button. It does make a big difference, and if you haven't already, do remember to subscribe. So let's talk image quality. Now, those of you who follow my channel will know I don't get too technical with these things. I don't really like zooming in and comparing pictures side by side. If somebody was viewing a photo you took, they're not magically going to think that photo is better just because it's a bit sharper in the center. My personal opinion when it comes to things like sharpness is pretty much all new lenses are sharp enough. It doesn't need to be pin sharp. A pin sharp image isn't going to make your photos any better, especially in street photography. Now, if you're doing portrait photography or you're doing product photography, then yeah, having that sharper lens can make a difference. But for most street photography, I actually find the softer, more old school kind of retro lenses actually give more character to your photos, and I just prefer the way they look to my eye. Now, when it comes to comparing these two lenses, the new version and the old one, the new one is slightly sharper. So as I said, if you do compare an image taken with this lens against this lens and you put them side by side, you will see, especially at f1.2, that the new version is slightly sharper. But that said, it's not noticeably sharper to the point where you'll be able to instantly tell which photo was taken with the new version compared to the old one. So it's not that big of a deal. Fujifilm do state that these new lenses take better use of Fujifilm's new 40 megapixel sensors, which you find in the X-T5 and the X-H2S. In my own experience, honestly, I don't see too much of a difference. One of the things I really like about the 56 1.2 is how it handles highlights. The transitions between the highlighted areas to the more contrasty, darker zones of your images. I feel like it's softer than, say, the 50 f2, which is a bit more clinical. Now, there is a slight difference to how these two lenses handle out of focus areas. I find the old one to be a bit softer. Now, in my opinion, I prefer that. Technically speaking, the new 56 1.2 handles it better. Everything is a bit clearer and cleaner in the background. So again, if you're doing portraits, if you're doing product photography, that is going to make a difference. If you're doing street photography, it's not as much of an issue, and you might actually prefer the older version. The f1.2 aperture really does make this lens ideal for shooting at nighttime. Those of you who follow this channel or my social media platforms will know I love shooting at nighttime, and despite the autofocusing issues, and I will get onto that shortly, while I was in Japan, I was able to take some of my favorite shots at nighttime with this lens. The main reason for this is I'm able to capture cleaner images at lower ISOs, and in turn that makes editing those photos in post much easier too. Now, one of the main improvements Fujifilm made to the new 56 1.2 was adding weather resistance. The old version doesn't have weather resistance. The new version, I used it a lot in Japan under rainfall and had absolutely no issues. However, you can save yourself a lot of money by going for the old version and just avoid shooting during rainy conditions, or you can also just use, say, a 50 f2 for those rainy days. Talking of the build, the new version is actually both heavier and larger than the original. So when you compare them side by side, it doesn't look like a big difference, but when you have this lens on the front of your camera, you do actually feel a difference between the old one and the new one. I'd say the new one actually feels slightly too big and heavy, whereas the older version always impressed me for how small and light it was despite being an f1.2 lens. So this is probably one of the most disappointing aspects of this lens. Is the autofocusing. Now, usually when Fujifilm update their lenses, they include their new autofocusing system like we see in the 33mm f1.4. However, with the 56, while some improvements have been made, it doesn't feel too different to the original. The original version of the 56 1.2 can be pretty slow and inaccurate when it comes to autofocusing, even on Fujifilm's newer camera bodies. So for example, if you're doing street photography and you're using, say, continuous autofocus, this lens can go all over the place hunting for your subject, and often it just gets lost, to the point where I very rarely use continuous autofocus with this lens, and instead I either use single point or switch to manual. Unfortunately, the same goes for the new version of the 56 1.2. When shooting at nighttime, again, it can sometimes get lost or a bit confused. It is slightly better than the old version, but not a major step up, and again, when you compare it to Fujifilm's other lenses, it's definitely not in the same league. This is why I say this lens slows me down when it comes to street photography. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it will change how you shoot. So with this lens, I'm a bit slower, a bit more considerate about what I'm shooting, which, as I said, can be a good thing. But if you're looking to go out and capture people and fast moving objects, then this lens isn't going to be the one for you. On the positive side though, the new version of the 56 1.2 has a significantly shorter minimum focus and distance compared to the old version. Now, with the old version, I actually found myself often having to take a step back in order to take a photo. The minimum focusing distance of this lens is 70 centimeters, whereas on the new one it's 50. So there's a 20 centimeters difference. So yeah, that is a welcome improvement. Alright, so after using both of these 56mm lenses, if I was to decide between the two of them, I'd still go for the old version. Now this is partly down to the price. You can pick up this lens for around $300 on the used market, and that is an absolute bargain. For most users, I feel like it's better to save your money, get the old version. You're going to get it for a lot cheaper, and you can use the rest of that money on a photography trip, which will actually make you a better photographer rather than buying a sharper lens. It's also worth noting that this lens and pretty much all lenses are significantly cheaper in Japan compared to Europe. Also, if you're coming in as a tourist, you can get your tax back from the purchase, so it works out a lot cheaper, and was one of the main reasons why I picked up the new version while also having the old version. So yeah, the 56 1.2, one of my favorite lenses. It's not to say this new version isn't good, it is a great lens, one of my favorites, and it's a lens I'm going to be using a lot this year. I'm actually still deciding which version of these lenses to keep, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this lens. Do you own the new 56 1.2, or do you have the old one? Are you thinking of upgrading from the old one to the new one? Or if you have any questions about this lens, just drop them down below and I will get back to you. Remember to hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed this episode, and if you haven't already, subscribe. A big thanks for watching this, and I'll catch you in the next one.